Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Philosophy of in Eastern Europe podcast brought to you by the European Center for Philosophy of Culture. We would like to re-examine Eastern Europe from a philosophical perspective.
One can say that, given the current geopolitical and geocultural circumstances, this question was never more important than it is now. So, what is Eastern Europe? Where is it located? What are its distinctive axiological and normative characteristics? What is its significance for the European cultural project?
One of the distinctive characteristics of our region, Eastern Europe, is that whenever political power radically alienates people, the people stand up, mobilize themselves, undertake responsibility for their lives and their fate. What is striking is that in most cases, these social phenomena appear out of the blue. That is, their appearance, massive scale, the impressive level of social self-organization, and their ethos cannot be explained from within pre-existing social political conditions. Solidarity movement in Poland, the singing revolution in the Baltic states, and more specifically the Sąjūdis movement in Lithuania, Euromaidan and the Revolution of Dignity, the Belarusian Revolution from 2020 are just a few examples. Our guest today is Professor Tatiana Shchyttsova from the European Humanities University, the Belarusian Emigratory University in Vilnius, a social and political philosopher, phenomenologist. But she's not only a theoretician. She took an active part in the Belarusian protests. Nowadays, she's an advisor to Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya on a future reform of education and science. We'll talk about the Belarusian Revolution and its legacy.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, for giving a floor, for sharing experience about the Belarusian protest movement 2020. It seems to me that Belarusian protest movement of 2020 was the most important event in the history of post-Soviet Belarus. It was the event that has a long-term implications, long-term effects and long-term impact on our future. And it seems to me not only for future of Belarusian society, but it concerns also future of our region in general. And it concerns also the future of Europe, as Belarus is a European country. To some extent, it can be considered, it can be compared with the crucial impact of the Polish Solidarność movement, the large-scale impact of this movement on the faster development of the Polish society. Just to start, I'd like to identify three key points in terms of what is the most important legacy of the Belarusian protest movement of 2020, or as I sometimes prefer to define, legacy of the Belarusian Revolution of 2020. The first thesis. We observed the emergence, the birth, the genesis of the new collective political subject. It was really crucial for our society. It's about manifestation and appearance of a democratic community of citizens capable of acting in solidarity for common political goals, for the common good. Let me remind about very well known definition of Aristotle, ancient Greek philosopher. He defined human being as zoon politikon. I can say as a philosopher that in 2020, Belarusians became such a kind of zone politikon. I mean that they consciously, jointly, took joint responsibility for their polity. It corresponds, to my mind, to definition given by Aristoteles many centuries ago. So the key discovery of this revolution was that there is the we. So the we as a democratic community which is built on a shared agency and has shared values, shared concerns, shared aspirations. What must be stressed in addition, this new collective subject had all reasons to define themselves as the people in the constitutional sense. It means as the source and beer of sovereignty. So the second point, our revolution has led to the crucial actualizations of two political questions. What should our state be? How should it look like? And the second question, who are we? The first questions concern the structure of our polity. It's a question of how do we see democratic governance, so it's about democracy. And the second question, who are we, concerns our national self-determination. This is really a revolutionary moment for us. Revolution 2020 led to a remarkable actualization of the national agenda. The appearance of characteristic posters like "We are Belarusians," in the course of protest movement, posters like "We are Belarusians" or "We Belarusians are peaceful people," as well as the revival and active use of various historical national symbols. All these phenomena indicated a new actualization of the national agenda. I'd like to stress here that this actualization of the national agenda became even more acute, even more relevant and important after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2020. The complicity of the Lukashenko regime in Putin's war against Ukraine and the processes of integration between Russia and Belarus, intensification of these processes during the last years, all this show that right now, the task for Belarus is not only democratization, but also the preservation of national sovereignty. Today, Belarus, like Ukraine, is under the dramatic threat of political and cultural colonization, under the threat of neo-imperialist takeover by Russia. In light of this second point, I'd like to add the last one, the third point, and it's exactly about this threat of neo-imperialistic subjugation of Belarusian society, Belarusian culture. The Belarus protest movement of 2020 laid the foundation for changing the perception of Belarus in Europe and in the world in general. It laid foundation for rethinking of the very place of Belarus in European geocultural space. This is really crucial. It's about changing the image of Belarusian society, Belarusians, in European context and global context. And this kind of change, the perspective of changing approach and perception of Belarus implies also perspective of rethinking of the very concept of Eastern Europe. This is also very important, that what happens today in Belarus and with Belarus, in Ukraine and with Ukraine, in our region, in general, it directly leads to the necessity, to the task to rethink our region as such, the region of Eastern Europe. And again, it makes sense to repeat that after the Russian large-scale invasion of Ukraine, this task became even more acute, even more significant. Today, many scholars discuss this agenda in terms of the necessity of recentering of the region of Eastern Europe. And when we are talking about the recentering of Eastern Europe, it means that we have to overcome tradition to look to Belarus, to Ukraine, through the lenses of Russo-centric policy, Russo-centric agenda. We have to overcome vision of Eastern Europe from the perspective from this neo-imperialistic perspective generated from the point of view of Russia. So this is three key moments I'd like to identify and to stress in terms of legacy of the Belarusian protest movement, significant both for our country, our society, but not only for our society, in more general context as well.
Thank you for your, Tatiana, for your expose, such a concise expose. I really like what you said about this overcoming of Russo-centric perspective in thinking about Eastern Europe. I have a couple of questions, of course. What makes the Belarusian Revolution unique? At the beginning, I mentioned a couple of examples of such social movements in this region of Europe. But what makes I'm not asking you about comparing this or that phenomena, this or that historical events. I'm just asking about uniqueness of Belarusian Revolution, and in what sense it can be called revolution. There are some arguments in favor of that, but there are also some strong arguments against.
Yes, thank you for this question, especially taking into account that I advocate the using of the word, the definition, Belarusian Revolution. But first, let me start with a very brief outlining the common context which Belarusians share with other countries you mentioned, first of all, our neighboring countries, Lithuania, Ukraine, and Poland. What we belong to the same, or we are part of the same historical context. And here, I mean that examples of the democratization processes you mentioned in Poland, in Lithuania, in Ukraine, this was examples of liberation of these societies at issue, liberation from the Soviet or communist, we can define also this way, from the Soviet or communist paradigm of modernity. This was crucial for the whole region of the Central and Eastern Europe. Liberation from this paradigm of modernity. Because as you know, there were two ways which were developed in parallel, so to say. The Western way and Western paradigm of modernization, of modernity, and this way, or this paradigm of modernization, which was realized under the conditions of communist rule, the rule of USSR, and domination of Soviet regime over the whole region. And as for Belarus, Belarusian society was very long time and still, unfortunately, until now, still Belarus is under the autocratic rule, Lukashenko's rule, which still belongs or to a large extent to this Soviet paradigm of modernity. As for the use of this term Belarusian Revolution, it seems to me that it's pretty justifiable to use this term because despite the fact that, of course, it wasn't the revolution in politological sense. I mean that, unfortunately, our protest movement didn't win. We didn't defeat this political regime, the autocratic regime, authoritarian regime of Lukashenko. But nevertheless, it was a kind of social revolution because we observed radical social change in our society. And I mean here exactly the emergence of new collective political subject. So it was indeed radical change of our society in terms of the genesis of new democratic community of citizens, so this clear reflection about what they want and what they struggle for. Unlike the experience of Polish solidarity, Belarusian protest movement was characterized by had a particular what is difference? What is a key difference? This new collective political subject didn't represent particular social class. So if in case of Polish protest movement, Polish solidarity movement, there was a working class, so and also there was a trade union as a central institution or central collective organ which could coordinate the whole protest activity. So in Belarus, we didn't have such a clear, articulated leadership in terms of some particular social class, and we didn't have some specific centralized institution. Therefore, in order to characterize this new collective political subject, I suggest to use the term democratic multitude. So I characterize this new democratic community as a democratic multitude. And I borrow this term from the contemporary post-Marxist tradition. What I mean when I use this term, what we should take into account. First of all, the fact that representatives of all generations, all sectors, all different, professions, all social classes and subclasses participated in the protest movement. There wasn't some leading class who could be considered in terms of leadership, as it was the case in Poland. This term democratic multitude also very useful because it indicates that this new collective political subject was characterized by non-homogeneity. And the protest movement as such was characterized by decentralization, by spontaneity, and by spontaneous creativity, local spontaneous creativity in terms of grassroots initiatives across the whole country. This was really something remarkable. It was very specific characteristics of the democratic protest movement in Belarus in 2020. I'd like to stress once again that the protest had no centralized leadership. It's really unique situation. I don't mean that that there were not such experiences in world never, but when we consider what our region, and especially when we take into account how our civil society looked like before the year 2020, it's very impressive that we observed such mass protest activities, and it didn't have at the same time any centralized leadership. Another very important characteristic I'd like to highlight, and this time it would make sense to compare our protest experience with Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity. So unlike Ukrainian situation at that time, Belarusian protest developed in under essentially other political conditions. And now I mean that in Belarus, we had and still have highly consolidated autocracy. It wasn't the case in Ukraine. We didn't have strong political elites beyond the power vertical, as it was the case in Ukraine. And let me stress also that we didn't have the separation of power principle. So this principle, the principle of separation of power, even didn't exist in our country, because after the referendum that was carried out by the authorities in 1996, Lukashenko initiated the organization of this referendum. The result of this referendum was exactly it was about rejection of the principle of separation of power. And from this moment, according to Belarusian constitution, it is the president who has all instruments for practicing power and actually sovereign domination in our country. So, as you see, the key characteristic of our political situation, political crisis in 2020, consisted in the how the political antagonism looked like, how it was structured. The protest community confronted the sovereign power of the dictator, confronted this consolidated autocracy, highly centralized authoritarian regime. So we confronted this sovereign power of the dictator or of the sovereign after the results of the election, after the August 9. Lukashenko should be considered not more only as a dictator, but also in terms of tyranny. He became tyrann due to the results of the election. So we confronted with the sovereign power of this tyrann in the sense defined by Carl Schmitt. So it was confrontation with the sovereign, as this term was conceptualized by Carl Schmitt. So it was about absolute power, and it was about misuse of the state monopoly on force, on use of force. Sovereign, it is a person who has power to decide on use of violence against their citizens, and it was made by Lukashenko in this decisionist way. So let me let me remind about this again, about this key characteristic of the sovereign, understood in terms of this sovereignty and sovereign power from this Schmittian perspective. This one of the key definition, it is exactly decisionism. What means decisionism? It means arbitrary decision making by autocrat, by dictator. Arbitrary decision making by dictator who can arbitrarily ignore the rule of law and who can arbitrarily suspend the constitution of a corresponding country. Let me quote Carl Schmitt, it's very concise formulation. Sovereign is the one who decides on the state of exception. It is exactly what happened in Belarus. Lukashenko decided that it is a time to introduce the state of exception. What does it mean? It means that he acted and he thought in terms of the state of exception. For Belarusian citizens, it had dramatic consequences. It had, first of all, confrontation with illegitimate violence, unthinkable, illegitimate, disproportionate violence. Therefore, the last thesis I'd like to formulate answering this question, what was said before by me explains the essential characteristic and actually strategic choice of the Belarusians. I mean, strategic choice to develop non-violent protest movement. Non-violent protest movement was a strategic choice by this new collective political subject. Why it was crucial to practice non-violent protest? Because non-violent protest was an instrument for our protest community, how to advocate, how to assert, and how to promote alternative values for our common life. So once we have to protest against the sovereign power, we have to show that we as a community of citizens share other values and we advocate other values and we not just resist to this regime, but by protesting against this regime, we assert alternative values as a basis, to be considered as a basis for building other polity, democratic polity. Therefore, our protest movement was a kind of practicing ethics and politics of nonviolence. So this is what happened in 2020. It was about practicing ethics and politics of nonviolence in form of the nonviolent peaceful protest.
Yeah, that's in the light of what you said, now even for me it's much clearer how unique the Belarusian Revolution was. The way how very spontaneously, in a very short period of time, you created this collective political subject is something really outstanding, while operating in a completely different circumstances. For example, your comparison with Ukraine was very adequate here. So my next question would be about this that very collective subject, because you said today and also on the another occasion, you say that very spontaneously and very quickly from the shared emotions emerged a collective subject, a collective we, or the we. And this collective subject was of political nature. So my question now would be, we are now almost 5 years after the revolution. Does this subject persist over time? And if so, how does it articulate itself nowadays?
Yeah, thank you. It's also very important questions. My key thesis in this regard is that I'm sure that it is thanks to this fact of the emergence of the new collective political subject that we still have, as you stress it, it's almost 5 years behind, yeah? But the key result of the protest movement of 2020, the emergence of this new collective political subject, given this fact, we still have pretty active democratic community of different sorts. And I'd like to stress that these pro-democratic forces, pro-democratic Belarusian forces, which currently reside on both sides, both in Belarus, but also in numerous diasporas. There are many diasporas across the whole world, but of course the biggest Belarusian diasporas are in Lithuania and in Poland. Today, we can observe many activities of Belarusians in diaspora. What is crucial that Belarusians continue to show impressive examples of mutual solidarity and creativity, and even cross-border solidarity and cross-border creativity. There are so many different projects, different initiatives realized both by Belarusian business which was forced to relocate in other countries. Also, different initiatives and projects by NGOs. Most of them were also forced to relocate in other countries, to Poland, to Lithuania, but not only. What is also very important, we have special organizations which regularly organize actions which allow to provide help, to provide assistance for families of political prisoners and also for ex-political prisoners who, after liberation, sometimes are forced to leave Belarus. So, generally, I think that the very quality of how our pro-democratic forces look today, I would stress the very high level of joint solid efforts and also high level of civic and political engagement. In this regard, it's worth mentioning that we have pretty strong political institutions which represent and advocates interests of Belarusians in the European and global contexts. First of all, it's Office of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, but also the United Transit Cabinet. And the third very important institution, it is a coordination council. So together, these three institutions carry out the very important function of political representation of the interests of Belarusians in this very difficult situation. dramatic situation for Belarusians. I mean that so this split pro-Belarusian, pro-democratic forces into two dimensions. The big part is reside in Belarus, and also many Belarusians were forced to leave the country for political reasons, just to feel safe.
At some point, you mentioned that one of the main components of Belarusian revolution as a revolution was of ethical nature. So now this leads me to the next question, because I believe that was also the perception from abroad, that your revolution was mainly it was raised, it was triggered by a kind of ethical shock, and the response was in a form of an axiological and normative project. Could you say a couple of more words about its leading ideals, and to what degree do they persist over time?
Yes, indeed. Our protest movement actualized the alternative, axiological and normative horizon for our society. Alternative with regard to how authorities acted. Very basic intuition, the very basic ethical intuition can be formulated in very simple way. This phrase was written on many posters, which people used during the protest movements. The phrase was really very short: "Stop violence." If you look at the photos, pictures from the documentations from the protest movement, you will probably be surprised how many times this phrase, maybe in different formulations, is repeated in different contexts, in different posters, etc. But this is, so to say, the basic ethical imperative. Stop, or basic intuition, stop violence. But it was it created the ground for what I earlier defined as the ethics and politics of non-violence. I used this formulation in order to characterize the very essence of our protest movement. But let us elaborate a bit more on this formulation. So what does it mean, stop violence? We can try to formulate it in terms of positive program, so to say. I'd like to refer here to the results of the National Sociological Survey that was conducted prior to the year 2020, namely in 2016. And during this sociological, within the frame of this sociological survey, there was one question, question about the key values which Belarusians consider as the most characteristic. And 3 key values were chosen during this survey. They are respect for human life, human rights, and personal freedom. So altogether, these 3 key values create this normative and axiological basis of our protest movement. But in addition, I'd like to pay attention that what was also very characteristic of our protest movement, it is a very particular careful relation, so expressions of care with regard to each other, with regard to other persons, to persons around, with regard to very environment. This careful relation and care about each other. It is something so typical that today there are many scholars who interpret even the whole protest movement in terms of, and our Belarusian Revolution interpret in terms of practices of care or careful relation with regard to our life world and to each other, have already formulated it. And there is something remarkable about this combination of values I mentioned earlier. So respect for human life, respect for personal freedom, and respect for human rights. In Belarusian language, there is a very particular word, I would say unique word. This is word "szanować." And I know that such a word, there is such a word also in Polish language, and it's really amazing fact. It's something which indicates that we could speak about the common ethos. And what is remarkable about this word, "szanować"? The word "szanować" unites combines. The word "szanować" combines two meanings. The first meaning is "szanować" is about respect with regard to personal dignity. And the second meaning, "szanować" means to care. To care about other person, to express this careful relation. And it indicates that "szanować" is, this word "szanować" implies or is rooted in the recognition of absolute value of human life. So, as you see, this unique word combines two perspectives. Recognition of absolute value of human life on the one hand, and recognition of personal dignity, personal moral dignity on the other hand. Philosophically speaking, we can see here overcoming of dualistic paradigm. When, if we consider, for example, Kantian philosophy, usually in terms of classical modern tradition, usually classical modern discourse divided this. On the one hand, there is human life and value of human life. And on the other hand, there are all issues concerning personal moral dignity. And "szanować", this word, provides us synthesis of these two perspectives. And I think this is really crucial. And therefore, this word "szanować" can be used as a kind of positive, ethical, political imperative, which really express the fundament of the Belarusian protest movement, because it takes into account and synthesizes, brings to synthesis both perspectives.
I believe this is like, the main core, the main revolutionary aspect of this whole Belarusian revolution, and this reminds me Professor Józef Tischner, who called this Polish Solidarity movement as a revolution of consciences.
Yeah.
Which means that out of the sudden, almost 10 million people decided to take care of what they are doing and the ways how they are acting. To take care of themselves, to take responsibility for themselves, to take the responsibility for their professions and for each other.
Absolutely, I agree. And you see, it's about the fundamental ethicization of our political life.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this ethicization, it emerges from this grassroots level, from horizontal communication and mutual solidarity of citizens.
Okay, let me move to the next question, because I believe this is also a very important question, and because it touches one of the another crucial aspect of Belarusian Revolution. It is often said that the Belarusian Revolution was a revolution with a woman's face. So whenever we think about the Belarusian Revolution, the most common image is that of a social movement led by three women leaders, Tsikhanouskaya, Kolesnikova, Tsepkala, a movement in which masses of women stood up in a radically patriarchal society and were willing to take the risks in their struggle for freedom for their people. However, some critics say that it is confusing to think of the revolution in terms of spectacular female phenomenon, that the revolution failed in challenging the inequitable status of women, nor did it even intend to do so. This is also because, as the critics claim, Belarusian women stood up for their men on their behalf. There are many comparisons to the role Belarusian women played during the Great Patriotic War, for example. Or there were many in Belarusian social media, as far as I know, there were many comments like, so our political regime is so bad that even housewives seem to be a better alternative than those rulers. Or another comment I remember was, these ladies are so beautiful that I prefer them than fat-faced bureaucrats. The fat-faced bureaucrats. You can call me a feminist, but a feminist in a normal sense of the word. So my question would be, do you agree with this criticism? And also, it is almost 5 years since the revolution. Do you see any real impact of the revolution on the improvement of the status of Belarusian women? Obviously, I mean here women in diaspora, Belarusian women in diaspora. I do not believe in such an impact in Lukashenko's state. Do you see any traces of the increasing sensitivity to these issues?
Well, yes, of course, it's a very important question, and it's a tricky question, and the ambiguous question, I would say. First of all, I think that, of course, the Belarusian Revolution, it wasn't a feminist revolution. It wasn't a feminist revolution, definitely. But it doesn't mean that this revolution was irrelevant to feminist agenda. On the contrary, I think that Belarusian Revolution was precisely about, thanks to particular protest action and thanks to the role played by the women and the different forms of women's activism. So that Belarusian Revolution brought about new positioning of women as a subject in Belarusian society. And when you quote this feminist, one of the feminist critics, this Belarusian women stood up for their men on their behalf, I would say that these three women, this key political leadership, on the one hand, it's correct definition. Yes, they stood up for their men on their behalf, etc. But this is only the part of truth. A part of truth. We have to recollect and we have to remember and we have to stress that these three women took very important political decisions on their own together without any man's behind them. So they took resolute, critically important political decision, important for faster development of Belarusian protest movement, absolutely in regime of autonomy. In terms of their moral and civic autonomy, it was their decision. It was their responsibility. It was their joint commitments. And through their three-voice, polyphonic leadership, they provided, or they enabled empowerment of women. And it seems to me that this women's marches, which took place on Saturdays within the context of the Belarusian protest movements, they were to large extent empowered and enabled by this leadership developed by three brilliant women. But let me add also another fact and another form of activism. I'd like to mention this famous white chains, women white chains, which took place on August 12 and August 13, just after this several days and nights of terror, post-election terror. These white chains I consider as a inauguratory action of Belarusian Revolution, because in my view, what they realized was a kind of experience and practice of political sublime. And this practice of political sublime enabled faster development of protest movement. It enabled inactivation, initiation of new political imagination. It gave rise to new forms of protest activity. So this was really crucial, and these different forms of women's activism, it is something which is crucial for faster promoting of feminine and feminist agenda in Belarusian society. And your last question about to what extent it has had impact on this issue in our current situation. I'm sure it had crucial impact, but at the same time, I have to say that we still have this task to promote feminist agenda also among pro-democratic forces. We have many achievements on this way, but at the same time, there are still many challenges, and we have to achieve much more than we managed to achieve by today.
I think it's a very good refusal of this criticism, which was probably too radically feminist. Okay, so let me move to the last question. We have a couple of minutes left. Very briefly, why is the Belarusian Revolution important not only for Belarusians? Why should we perceive it as globally relevant? What we, non-Belarusians, can learn from this experience?
Well, speaking very briefly, I would say that the importance of Belarusian Revolution consists in very impressive revitalization of democratic aspirations, of beliefs and hopes that community of citizens can hope to build their society on the basis of the values they share together and following the principles they share, and developing democratic reform they discuss and promote together. I think that when people in different countries saw pictures from our protest movement, of course, as it seems to me, it was admiration about the society they didn't know, because Belarus until now is not really well researched country, even in the European context. But I'd like to stress that it was not only about admiration with regard to other society, but it seems to me that it was so important and it was accepted with such enthusiasm, it was perceived with such enthusiasm in different European countries, also because people in different European countries also would like to appear in situation when they could believe that democratic society, that building democratic society is possible. As we well know, since many years, democracy in Western society is also in a kind of crisis. It's recognized by leading thinkers, Charles Taylor, Jürgen Habermas, Chantal Mouffe, Ben Habib, etc. But also by thinkers from our region of Central and Eastern Europe. And the very fact that democracy is in crisis, not only in post-Soviet country, but also in global and in European countries, it shows that people from East European region and people from Western countries, people who jointly are interested in developing and building democracy in their country, they could share their experience, they could share their values, and they could learn from each other. And probably if they start sharing their experience and learn from each other, we could hope that together we could, how to say, actualize and develop new political imagination that will enable us to change situation in our countries in this mode of cross-border, transnational communication and cooperation. So my first point is that the Belarusian experience is important as an experience of revitalization of aspirations with regard to building democratic society, and believes that it's possible. Because in 2020, our basic feeling was that as there is we are capable. We are capable to build our future together. This is the first point. And the second point, that we have to think about cross-border cooperation between people, pro-democratic forces from different countries, in order to change situation not just in one country. Because I don't believe that situation can be changed really fundamentally in Europe, only in one country. In order to change situation and in order to develop democratic ideas and democratic reforms, we do need cooperation and mutual support in this cross-border mode, in transnational perspective. So this is probably the last point I'd like to stress.
And yet it was one specific, it was one specific nation which reminds us about this very special potential. And I believe we should thank again Belarusians for reminding us about this potential. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for this whole interview. Our guest was Professor Tatiana Shchyttsova. Thank you very much, Tatiana.
Thank you.